and welcome to the Motivational Millennial Podcast. I'm Ivy LeClaire.
And I'm Blake Brandis.
This conversation is inspired by our interview with Laymon Hicks, and the theme we are discussing is all about how we view ourselves and what is possible for us in our lives. So, Blake, what was your big takeaway around this theme?
I love what Laymon said about how our assessment of what is possible for us is so skewed by our experience. And he specifically talked about when his mother heard that he was going to be writing a book, and she just could not believe that he could write a book. And it wasn't because she didn't believe in him, but just that in her world and her experience, that was not something she conceived of as possible for him. And of course, now Laymon is an incredible motivational speaker. He has a doctorate, and he has achieved incredible success in his life. And it was such a great reminder that the world we see growing up, so often we just assume that's how life is, both in good and bad terms. Like, for example, some things might not seem possible because we've never seen other people around us achieve it, like have a healthy, happy relationship or have a job at an organization they love or go out and start their own business. So there's that kind of, we haven't seen it's possible. But also sometimes there can be this assumption of privilege. And I remember for myself, my family moved to Ireland when I was 10 for a year. And all of a sudden we didn't have a car or a television or a dishwasher or a washing machine or a lawnmower, just all these things I just assumed were part of what living was about. And it was a shock to me as a kid, but it was such a great experience because it opened my eyes to the idea that, wow, this is what privilege looks like. Privilege is just the assumption that the way I see the world is the way the world is for everybody else. So what I loved about Laymon's story and his journey is that he has been constantly shattering assumptions about the limitations that he might have had, that other people might have had for him in his life. And now he inspires other young people and educators to shatter their own limitations in their lives.
It's really amazing to think about how important it is to be aware of the way we're seeing ourselves, the way we're boxing ourselves in, the way we may be holding ourselves back, and to take steps forward to, like you said, shatter those expectations or those limiting beliefs. When I think about sort of initiating that in your own life in like a practical way, is to do what is called a radical act, which is something that puts yourself out of your comfort zone in a way that you don't think is possible for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Laymon talks about this when, in terms of writing a book and, you know, eventually getting a PhD, like those were radical acts that ultimately shifted what he thought was possible for himself. But they were really big, like long-term radical acts too. And so something that could be a radical act is, I remember having an advisor or staff member in undergrad. He was suggesting to me that I go sing karaoke sober. I remember at the time thinking that was like the most ludicrous thing that I'd ever heard. But that's the thing. Like when your brain goes, wow, there's no way I could do that. Then if you were to turn around, go out and do that thing, it's like, wow, maybe I've been holding myself back in all of these other ways. And what kinds of expectations from other people or, you know, society or culture, myself, like have I ingrained in me? Even though it's just singing karaoke sober, it can like have this ripple effect on your life. So like just thinking about what is something in your mind that you're like, there's no way I could do. I mean, for me, I had a radical act this last year. I cut my hair into a pixie cut, you know, and I didn't, for the longest time, I had all these thoughts and opinions of people in my past or past partners or whatever in my head that just had me believing that I couldn't do that. And then I did it and I was like, heck yeah. So it's just thinking about that. What could potentially be a radical act for you, Blake?
Yeah, I shaved my head.
Oh yeah,
around the
you
same time,
just did.
actually. That was pretty radical.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I think sometimes having a symbolic external thing is really helpful to overcome so many of the internal fears and limitations.
Hmm.
Ivy and I went on a ropes course that was definitely a radical getting out of my comfort zone act of crossing a sky bridge 500 feet above a forest and just the sheer terror of every step. Even though I'm hooked on a harness attached to a steel cable, still, my brain, the part that wants to keep me alive, is saying there is nothing between you and 500 feet of forest canopy below you. So making it through that for me was really important because it proved that even though I had to take it slow, much slower than a lot of other people who were crossing the sky bridge, I still did it. And so when I then, in subsequent weeks and even months, have come up against things that feel scary, that feel daunting, I just remind myself, it's okay. You crossed that sky bridge. You had to take it very slowly and one step at a time, but you did it. So here's the thing. If you want to get from where you are right now to the thing you want to accomplish, you don't have to sprint there, but you got to just take one step. And if you only take one step and you pause and you stare at the ground, and you freak yourself out, it's going to be a lot harder than if you take one step and then one step and then one step. And I feel that's a common theme among some of our after shows, but I can't stress enough the power of the one step.
Yeah, rather than freezing up entirely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also, to that point about the power of the one step and freezing up, I think it's important to have compassion for yourself and where you're at, even if it is frozen
Yes.
for a little bit. Because I think sometimes what can make the freezing worse is that you know that you should be taking the one step. Why am I not taking the one step? I should be doing this. Now I'm just stuck here. Why am I still stuck here? So.
Yeah. One of our mentors, Jesse Corin, has this great image. Whenever you're doing something meaningful that you care about, he says it's like you're on the train and you could be, moving forward, you could be sitting still, you could be running backwards on the train, but as long as you stay on that train,
Yeah.
eventually you will get to your destination. But he's like, just don't get off the train. So often people quit, figuratively jump off the train because they're like, oh, I feel like I'm going backwards or this isn't working or I'm afraid. As long as you stay on the train, it's okay to pause. It's okay to even go backwards a little bit, but just don't get off the train.
Yeah, and that sort of ties into how we view ourselves and what we think is possible for us. Because if we don't allow ourselves the space to have moments of fear or doubt or anxiety, then we can let that shift what we think is possible for ourselves in a not so helpful way, right? We can be like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling afraid right now. I'm never going to be able to do this. I should just quit, So it's being aware too that, having fear, doubt, uncertainty, all of that is a normal part of just life, especially when we're pursuing something that we really care about or wanting to create a fulfilling life in whatever the way that looks like. And I think that that's also important to note.
Mm-hmm. What else did you find inspiring from our conversation with Laymon?
Well, I thought it was interesting, because a little bit ago I mentioned that getting his PhD helped him shift the way he views himself. But it's interesting because he kind of talks a little bit about some resistance around that because, he's saying that he knows if he worked hard to get his doctorate, but still sometimes when people say Dr. Hicks, his brain is like, what? Because part of him is still catching up to a shift in identity around I'm someone who can get a PhD, not just I'm someone who can get, but I'm someone who has gotten a PhD. And he talks about that I am enough, element. Like I can let this sink in, because I am enough, I'm good enough. I put in all this time and effort and energy into getting this doctorate. I can let myself be someone who has a doctorate and shift that identity. And that's really interesting too, because, oftentimes we work really hard towards something or we accomplish things or we get a promotion. And, I can tell you many times when I'm working with clients, it's like, I just got a new client and I signed them on for a $30,000 contract or something like that. And, they just say it like it's the most just normal, easy thing. It's like, okay, hold on, let's just stop for a second and really celebrate that you created this in your life, because we don't do that enough.
Yeah. And there's a lot of cultural pressure to not celebrate that. I remember this is such a good example of what you're saying because I remember right after I got my PhD, I was having lunch with a few older professional colleagues, and one of them said something to the effect of, "Oh, well, if you're really secure in having a PhD, like you don't need to put it on your email signature," or something really weird. It was kind of passive aggressive. And I was
Huh.
just like, no, like you've worked for 4, 5, 6 years and overcome all these challenges and put together something that's really meaningful and hopefully impactful in some way. And that gives you a credential. And you don't have to go around, yelling at people who don't call you doctor, to like, call you doctor. But I think it's totally legit to just have an acknowledgement of it in your email signature. And so I guess what's really real for me is that there are going to be people who are going to see your celebration as an act of arrogance,
Hmm.
as an act of making them feel less. But that is on them. Like that is a
Mm-hmm.
choice they are making to feel less. And that's based in some insecurity they have. And it should in no way damper your own celebration and acknowledgement of what you've accomplished.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, and this always reminds me of the Marianne Williamson quote that's all about, and I don't remember the exact wording, but basically that there's no, honor in dimming your own light so that you don't make other people feel, how's the analogy? Dark. Now, I don't know what you don't have to make yourself small so you don't make other people feel small. I was trying to go along with this light analogy and then it got weird. But I think that's really important because, my favorite part of that quote is about giving permission. It's so interesting because in some cultures, and certainly in some ways in the culture I was raised in, when I started talking about, I'm not currently pursuing that and may never pursue that. When I was talking about getting a PhD, I was teased about PhD standing for pilot higher and deeper or something like that. Basically you're in more debt, you don't need more of this. Like getting a PhD was seen as silly and ridiculous, not a good use of your time. And so, if we're raised in cultures like that, where it's like accomplishment or a certain type of accomplishment is diminished or dismissed, it can be even more challenging to really acknowledge what you've done and talk about it and own it because you're afraid of, I don't know, some kind of social repercussions of talking about it too.
Hmm. I think it's important to hold compassion in those kind of cultural environments too. And this is really what we're talking about, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
people's experience and their received wisdom and their understanding of what it means to do something or have some credential. That might be all they have. They don't necessarily have the perspective that you might or that I might or that someone else might. And that's okay. Like it's not about making them wrong. It's not about trying to convince them to want the thing we want.
Right.
But if it matters that they understand, if it is someone like maybe a parent or someone who it would be nice if they actually understood and supported you, then I think coming at it from a place of, hey, I totally understand why you feel that way. And I honestly felt some of those things too growing up. And here's something that I learned that changed my mind about it. So it's coming at a place from compassion, just saying, hey, here's some additional information that might affect the way you see it, but not being attached to them buying in, because I think we can try so hard to go for other people's approval. And if they don't approve, then say, you know what, scrap it, it's not worth it because their approval is more important than me pursuing my dream. And so that's where I think it's just really important to stand in your truth. And it's really hard. And that's why it's important to find communities of people who do share your vision
Mm-hmm.
and your passion for whatever the thing is that you're trying to accomplish, because it is going to be hard. And you don't need to add voluntarily another layer of people doubting you into what are already going to be some of the logistical challenges that will likely come up.
Yeah, I think also it's important to have compassion for yourself during those times too.
Mm-hmm.
Because there may be times where you try to explain it, or you're talking to people who, yeah, understandably just don't have the perspective or the same kind of values. And, and that's okay. And it's okay too that you have your own values that are different. Because I think, what we can often want to do in life is, we try to minimize our own pain or experience of pain through numbing or mitigating or whatever keeps us from feeling hurt. So it can be hurtful if, for example, a parent or a close loved one or a close friend doesn't see the value in what you're wanting to do with your life. So it can be painful. So then we want to either convince them that it's good so that the pain will go away, or just not do that so that the pain will go away, So taking the other path, sort of a third path of, they may not understand and they may not be supportive, but you are going to still continue doing it. That is a good time for self-compassion, because you are then experiencing pain from that. And if you give yourself self-compassion and acknowledgement of the pain you're experiencing, then, you might be less likely to try and numb it or something, or ignore it or cram it away so that it bursts out at really bad times or something,
no, it's so hard because evolutionarily we are wired to seek other people's approval, especially people who are in close relation to us, because that was a survival mechanism for millions of years of our evolution. And so our brains freak out. It's like, no, we're going to be outcast from the tribe, and then we're going to starve because we won't have the social support,
Yeah.
And so I think you're 100% on with the self-compassion, because everything in your nervous system is probably screaming at you to say, don't upset these people, don't disappoint them, don't go against what they want, because you'll be outcast. And the blessing of the modern era is that you are able to choose family, community, friends. Those choices can be hard, but you do have the freedom to choose them.
And really choose people who are going to support you in your evolution as how you view yourself and what's possible for you continues to evolve.
I love the way you just put the capstone on
that,
Ivy.
You know it, brother. I just pulled it right in.
You did. Nice, pretty bow on top. Well, thank you, Ivy, for a phenomenal series of reflections. This is making me ponder right now. I'm just analyzing my own life. Like, oh my gosh, where are all the ways I've had limiting expectations, and where I'm afraid of disappointing people? Where do I need to go and expand my comfort zone? So,
that's how you knew we're doing it right.
Exactly. And as always, to our amazing listeners, we hope you have also gotten some value out of the conversation. Let me rephrase. Let me stand in our power. We are grateful to share our experience with you and trust that you will take whatever is good and helpful for you out of that. So I'm not going to minimize our own power. I will and be appreciative and come from that place of gratitude, because that is truly where we have the strength. All right, everybody. Peace and love. Thank you for listening to the Motivational Millennial Podcast. We will catch you next week.
Bye. For show notes and previous episodes, or to learn more about our coaching and event offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. That's millennial, MILLENNIAL. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
Our theme music was composed and performed by our very own Blake Brandis.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Brittany Felix. Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!